Thank you for staying with us. I-24 News Morning Edition on this March 11, 2015. Again, 6 days to the Israeli elections. Our next item deals with how politics becomes very personal in the country of Israel. Now, tens of thousands of Israelis attended a rally in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square on Saturday evening to call for the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to be replaced in elections later this month. Organized under the banner Israel Wants Change and dubbed an anti-Netanyahu event, the rally was headlined by former Mossad chief Meir Dagan and who told the crowd of Israel that Israel is facing the worst leadership crisis in its history. But Michal Kesten-Keidar was speaking there too. She's the widow of the late Lieutenant Colonel Dolev Keidar, who was killed in Operation Protective Edge. That was the operation of the war over the summer, where Hamas and Israel battled. She also spoke at the rally and pleaded with Israelis to vote for a leader who would not send soldiers into another war. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, is what she said. What's important is life itself. But it's impossible to speak all the time about Iran and to turn a blind eye to the bloody conflict with the Palestinians, which costs us so much blood. This is what Michal Kesten-Keidar said on that stage, and we are very honored to be joined by her in studio this morning. Michal, good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, I want to tell you that I was crossing the square, Rabin Square, when you got on stage this Saturday. And the first line that you said, and I think was the beginning that resonated so strongly in my mind, was that you said that nobody in this election campaign is speaking about the war over the summer. First of all, how does that make you feel, and why do you think that is the case?
Well, it's very frustrating, makes me very angry. Many people ask me if I'm angry that no one, people, the community doesn't talk about the war. That I think is fine. It's healthy for a nation, for a people, not to dwell on the war, on the death, but to look forward. But that's the people. The leadership cannot, not talk about a war where 73 people were killed, civilians and soldiers, and go and talking about everything else, basically, when there's an election coming up.
Let's talk about your husband for a second. Dolev, how many years were you together?
16. Not enough.
You have 3 children.
Yes.
Now, you actually, in the past, you're a filmmaker and a lawyer, I think, as well.
Studied law.
Didn't
okay,
go
on
not,
with
not
it.
Practicing. You made a film. You live in an area in Israel called Modi'in. You made a film in 2009 called, in English we would say Waiting, because you live in a community of military women.
Yes.
Being married to Dolev, I'm sure that you were not expecting, but fearing a moment as such many, many years.
Well, when I was making the film, my producer kept telling me, put more of the fear inside the film. I want to sell it abroad. It has to talk about the fear because that's what makes you different from other people. But the weird thing is that fear doesn't really exist, at least in my life, and I know in the lives of other military families, because it's all the time there, and because it's such a big fear. If you realize it to yourself, if you don't hide it to yourself, you can't really go on living, because you'd be in constant, fear of life. It's like the biggest fear there is. You can't live with it inside of you, so you kind of turn a blind eye to it most of the time. It hits you at times, and then every time it touched me for a moment, it would stay for quite a while. But most of the time, I just turn a blind eye to it and to the dangerous things that Dolev was doing.
Dolev, you lost Dolev over there, as we mentioned, in Operation Protective Edge. That was over the summer. In this past weekend, you chose to speak at the rally. Why did you choose to speak at the rally? Which was a left-wing leaning rally, which was
Yes, I was always a leftist. I always thought that, but I was always sure that peace is the only solution to the problems here. War is a terrible thing to both sides, to all sides. No winners in war. And I was always a leftist. I think the thoughts started kind of bubbling in me near November 5th this year, the time of Rabin's death, which that time of year always made me, sad. You'd think, what would have been if he hadn't died? What would our country and our lives look like? But this year, I realised that the thoughts were much worse, much more personal. It's not just, what if he hadn't died, we'd have a better country. It was, what if he hadn't died, there'd be peace here, and I'd still have my beautiful, loving husband with me. And I started thinking about speaking back then in November, but it was too soon. And when the government decided about new elections, I realised that no one was talking about the war, and I started getting angry. I started writing a column. I started with a column about the elections.
Right.
And last Thursday, my friends started talking about the rally. Shall we go? Shall we not? And it was kind of a whim. I just got the number of the organisers, called them up and said, very pretentiously, like, let me speak. I want to speak.
I don't think pretentious at all. I think if anybody has the right to speak, it's you. You got reactions to it, and I'm going to have to touch on it. We were talking earlier in this broadcast about the polarization in the country, about the division. A man by the name of Haggai Guberman in a right-wing leaning channel, Channel 7, has said a horrific thing after you spoke. He said that in many ways that you I almost do not want to repeat this, that in many ways you caused your husband's death, and then you're going on stage and crying over it.
Whining.
Whining. You quoted
I
him.
know that word, whining.
Whining.
Yes.
When you hear something like that, well, first of all, what would be your... I'm sure you had a reaction. Other than punching a wall, I would have.
No, many people called me up, very worried, asking me if I was fine, but I just thought it was, well, not silly, but all the big festival around it, I thought it was silly because, first of all, we're at an election. Talk about the essence of things. Talk about the war. Talk about the economics. Don't talk about what, a journalist who no one knew before this said to me or didn't say to me. I had such a big horrible thing happened to me in the summer that a few words that anyone says or writes about me, I couldn't care less. It would take a very big thing to shock me now at this stage of my life. And I have to admit that some of the things he said inside and what he said to defend himself, he was right. I put myself out there. I decided not to be this normal, very dignified, quiet widow, just going to ceremonies quietly and crying in the side. I decided to put myself out there to talk about politics, and yes, to use my status as a widow for politics, because I think it's important, and that I wanted to do everything I can to help try at least to change the situation. So I put myself out there, and I should be ready for criticism.
Well, first of all,
of course he could have chosen better words, but I mean, who cares? I lost my husband. I really couldn't care about what anyone says about me.
No, very, very valid, and we're going to go back to what is really important, and that is your husband and the legacy that he leaves you. I'm wondering with you said before that you chose to enter, well, you have a column that you write in Walla, correct? Am I correct in saying that? You said that the most horrible thing happened to you over the summer. When you look at this election campaign and these polarizing thoughts and these polarizing notions and these polarizing statements, what would you like to see happen? What do you think should happen in this country? What are the things that, when you say that the campaigners are not talking about war, that you think the Israelis need to hear? You started it. You start talking about it. It's just impossible that the whole campaign is going on with no one talking about the conflict with the Palestinians. People, they talk about Iran. Mostly they're talking about economics now, because the word peace has become taboo. A bad word.
A bad word, and even the Labour Party are escaping it like you escape from fire. But it's the base to everything here. Even the economics. One of the reasons the economics is such in a bad state is because we need to put so much money in security, and because you can't expect big investments from abroad to come to Israel when there's a war going on every year with missiles going and the economics shutting down. So it is the basics. And also, like I said, before we start talking about the level of life, we have to talk about life itself. And you can't be ready to accept the death of a few, tens of soldiers, even if it is only soldiers and not civilians. You can't, just be expected to live with it. That's life, that's what we are. Like some people from the right wing say, this is life, we're in a bad neighborhood, it's inevitable, that's how it's going to be. I don't want to live like this. I do not want to expect this from life. Life should be more. We should have a normal life. Just be interested in football and shopping and food and not having to be afraid from war all the time.
Amen to that. One can only hope. But you and Dolev never really had a normal life in many ways. I mean, he was a military man to begin with.
Yes. Well, when I made my film, it's very difficult for me to watch this film now, and not just because it's looking at Dolev, but because when I made it, I was, frustrated from the fact that my husband only comes home once every 2 weeks, and the kids miss him, and I talk about it all the time that the kids miss him, and it's difficult to raise kids by myself. And I married him in order to be with him, not for him to only come home once every 2 weeks. And it's it's very saddening to watch it now, because I take it willingly with both hands now. If he'd come home even once a month, that'd be enough for me.
For 1 hour. The community that I know this is difficult. First of all, the community that you live in is a community of women, and I don't think many people realize it, of women that live with men that go often to war. And I'm assuming that your message is to try and stop that going away so many times to war in this country. Do you think that, what would you like the leaders of this country to hear just before, in the minutes that we have, the leaders of this country to hear, whomever it may be, from right or left?
No, we just want to have a nice, quiet, simple life. And the only way to do it is to reach a settlement with the Palestinians. They won't go away. They're here to stay. And now that there's long-range missiles, it's even more difficult to close your eyes. It's not like in the West Bank, we just build a wall and say, okay, we'll live here, they'll live there. They won't interrupt us, we can pretend they're not there. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like this, So even if you're not a left-wing who wants to end the occupation because of moral and ethics, and you can't control a whole people, even if it is just for security reasons, you have to end this conflict, and it will only end in one way, which is a settlement. We tried force. Every time there was a big big army operation, and we say, okay, no, it didn't work this time because we didn't use enough force. Let's hit them harder next time. So it hit them harder and harder and harder, and it doesn't work. It won't go away. I think the sad thing here is all the high-ranking officers, they're always saying it won't end. We can't win this with the army. You need to reach a settlement. The army people say that, and not left-wing army people, right-wing army people. And all the people who, not all, but many people who live in that area, in the West Negev, they're also saying, please give us a settlement. We cannot keep living with these missiles falling on us, and they will never end until you reach a settlement. You cannot end this with force.
Important and very, very, very wise word. Finally, first of all, once again, I want to tell you, I think you're incredibly, incredibly courageous. Support you've been receiving from people that you never met. Have you been approached by people in this country? Because I'm wondering if that just shows that one can bridge the divide, one can get to a point.
Yes. Actually, in a way, I'm happy of the incident with that reporter who wrote those awful words, because I've been getting support from people all over. I've been getting phone calls from people I don't know who live in the settlements, right-wing people who live in the settlements, religious people. Yesterday I got a very emotional letter from heads of 2 yeshivas,
right,
where I live, saying that even though they do not agree with anything I say, I'm very courageous and I have every right to go on stage, and they're happy that I did, and they denounce everything that reporter said.
It's a sliver, it's a sliver of hope. Michal, I have to tell you, thank you so much for coming today. I know this was not easy. I think your words are incredibly important. I think your message is incredibly important. You have, sadly, every right, to say the things that you say.